Go to our second part of this evening, which will be a dialogue with all the panelists here. And we want from the beginning to open it up to the audience, to involve you guys as well to ask questions. So we have actually two roving mics on either side. So if anybody has a question to kick things off, that would be great. Maybe we can kick things off here.
How was your reaction to what you got in terms of what you were expecting? Did we address the points that you really were going for? Or?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
This is feedback.
Come on.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I think for us, one of the main concerns in getting this event together was to try, because it felt like talking to people from various different disciplines, whether it be art, anthropology, philosophy, writing, there seem to be these same concerns popping up all over the place. You know, whether it's ideas around protest and the suppression of protest all over the world, which seems to increase daily, you know, with laws, police, presence, brutality, to surveillance. All these issues seem to be very pertinent to many different disciplines. So the idea behind the whole thing was to get people from a varied sort of array of disciplines, both here and in Brussels, to talk about these things, and maybe if not to draw some big conclusions with the event, to open up a platform on which many different conversations may be able to happen, both here and elsewhere, with the people who attended and right now as well. And I think also that seeing your talk, David, and seeing as well Nina's, it made me think, you know, with this idea of protesting in the shopping mall. Could a new way of sort of conceptualizing protest be thinking about it in a different space, or potentially thinking about the way protest is shaped as such, you know, something like Occupy, a temporary autonomous, something like that, an occupation? Is that some way of trying to outsmart, in a way, if that's even possible, the grip or the police repression in some ways?
Well, I mean, clearly, materially, 76 people did get arrested today, so let's not be, idealistic. But no, I mean, I think it reveals certain things that I think are very important and, potentially very interesting thinking about future protests. I mean, one of which is the point I was trying to make about, you know, that there being no more public space, only public order. You know, that protesting outside a closed embassy is maybe less relevant than protesting somewhere where you can, where there are hundreds of people who, some of whom might join in. And I just, you know, thinking about David talking about Kobani, but I was recently in Sarajevo, and that there have been huge protests in Bosnia this year, and ongoing protests, and no one really talks about them. And we're talking about situations where, you know, these are anti-austerity protests and anti-asset stripping protests, and protests about high unemployment. You know, and these are these situations where government buildings are being burnt down, police are changing sides, and government ministers are resigning. You know, you go there and it's like, oh my God, you're so much further along. you know, we sit around talking about this stuff all the time, but you're actually doing it. And they're like, yeah, you know, we have all the political action, what we need is more discussion. Oh my God, imagine that world. But I think, you know, just going back to the kind of commercial zones, protesting commercial zones, I mean, obviously something like UK and Cut, to some extent, you know, whatever you think of their politics, I mean, did do that on a mass scale, you know, going to shops. I mean, that's why they had to, you know, up the aggravated trespass law, which was originally brought in to deter animal rights protesters. You know, so they had to criminalise that form of otherwise not illegal protest. It's not illegal to go and stand in a shop. You know, in fact, the whole principle of consumer capitalism is that you go and stand in a shop and then buy something. You know, so I think there is something about that. You know, because nowhere really is public anymore. I mean, you know, if we think about the selling off of, you know, forests, of, you know, whatever is left, you know, it's very little anyway. It's all already owned by aristocrats. You know, and what does it mean to think about the city in terms of public-private ownership? You know, when we're walking through like a transport hub with all of these sort of pre-recorded, disembodied, female-sounding voices telling us what to do in this soft, coercive way. You know, do we feel that as a private or a public space? You know, what happens when there are no longer any national forms of ownership? You know, there are just franchises and private. You know, we're sort of scurrying through these regimes of private property. You know, and I think it's what happens when you seize that and say, well, we have to start from maybe protesting from within private property because there isn't really anywhere else.
Yeah. And it's always ambiguous. I mean, one of the fascinating things is that, public and private is so fused, you don't even know who actually is private property or not. I mean, I realized that when we were doing an occupation of goldsmiths, and we were talking about the property rights of them, like, if you make a pile of chairs as a barricade, who actually owns those chairs? Are they owned by, the university is a public, but it's also sort of private, but it's also, it sort of belongs to the state and kind of to the queen, I guess, but also it also belongs, this is actually totally unclear who actually owns this thing, or, this, I guess, but most of the things around us, the actual property rights are a little obscure, but the lines of force are very clear.
Yeah.
You know what you can do and what you can't, and somebody will come and beat you up if you do it wrong.
I'd like to respond to that and maybe perhaps give some keys to the incredibly weird thing that I did. Which is, I was very inspired by the idea of protesting in shopping malls. And in a way, as a practicing artist, and I don't know, we are in an art school, I don't know how many of you are art students, but as a practicing artist, the question very often comes up about the system of art, as in galleries, and what is the point of exhibiting in, let's call it the world's largest money laundering industry. But at the same time, surely that's exactly the place to protest. Surely that's exactly the site of concentration where one can be the most effective in questioning taking issue with these questions of powers and hierarchies. And what I read to you is actually a work of art that is normally, instead of hearing it, you normally read it, that I exhibit in galleries or in museums as a form of protest, which is essentially uncommodifiable because it's an experience, and you cannot sell an experience. You cannot sell a reading, so it's an impossible thing to sell. And there is a great surrender to cynicism in terms of how artists function today, in which, cynicism and irony replace any true attempt to try to get into the magic of what art can be. So, it's art, about the bullshit of the art market, but there's no reason why we can't reclaim the galleries. The problem is not, and it's a question of shifting the concept. We've all fallen into this very bad habit of thinking of artists as suppliers and producers, galleries as distributors, and collectors as consumers. But that's just a bad habit. We don't have to buy into that. And the gallery is as valid a site, the commercial gallery is as valid a site as the commercial shopping mall. And one can be as effective with works of art as one can with a dime or anything else. And so it just, that maybe gives, and I thought, how could I best, there's so many ways to talk about these questions that are so complex, and they're very close to my art and my heart, that I decided to give you something which was a performance, which was proactive in trying to think about the ways that art can function. So the reading is the reading of it is the act, which is an experiment.
There we go. Questions here, another pretty
Hey, thank you for all these presentations. I wanted to ask something from Nina and David, which somehow both of your talks made me think about, and this is transformative justice. I would like to ask both of you what you think about transformative justice, and also, especially David, about the justice systems or ways of dealing with justice or not having justice in Rojava.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You want to go first?
Maybe in a sense it'll probably be briefer than...
Okay.
I think it's a really crucial question. we ran a big event the other week about prison abolition and thinking about extrajudicial forms of accountability and so on. These are really live questions. Obviously, we're not in a situation in which anyone ever gets justice for when someone's killed in custody, right? You just, Jimmy Mbenga, the G4S guards who killed him were acquitted yesterday. It just never happens. Even if you want to stick with the system as it is, you know, I call for prosecution, and I totally understand families wanting to do that. It never happens, right? No one is ever, no police officer, no security guard is ever found guilty, and obviously it's this recognition that even if you have footage of someone being choked to death, you know, the grand jury won't indict, and I think it's recognising that sort of global pattern of, you know, serious, profound structural injustice that's racialised, you know, that makes these discussions have more relevance. So yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm very interested in questions of transformative justice. I myself struggle with the relationship between justice and violence and justice and revenge, and I think it's difficult to sometimes think about those things in a calm way. I've been thinking a lot about the concept of militant empathy lately, whatever that means, but I've been thinking about that phrase and how maybe there's a form of militant empathy that includes the possibility of hating the right people in the right way. And then, you know, the practice of what that means is as yet unwritten.
Yeah, I have much to say about the subject of hate, but I probably shouldn't go through the tangent. It's interesting. One thing I was going to say, which I didn't in my talk, was when we were involved in Occupy, we actually had a summer school, and it turned into something rather boring. But I had this idea that I thought, you know what we should do? We should get together all the people. We got such a broad range of people. We should get them together and kind of imagine, like, say we actually did win. We had New York City. How would we run it? You know, we get the union people. We get all these union people. They know how. We could get like different people from different, you know, sort of profession and perspectives, and kind of come up with a model, and it would be great. And you know, I couldn't get anybody to actually organize this thing. They all said, yeah, it's a really interesting idea. They just organized a stupid seminar where somebody would sound off like they usually do. And then, you know, I went to Ridgewood, and there's people actually doing it. They actually got a city, and they're doing, you know, trying to solve exactly these problems in a bunch of cities. It's, you know, the scale we can't even imagine. You know, we sit down and get a bunch of people to think about what we do under the circumstance, and here are these people who suddenly get a bunch of cities thrown in their lap. And the justice system is actually very revealing because, you know, essentially they have one advantage. It's a little like the Zapatistas. In fact, a lot of their models are indirectly inspired by the Zapatistas and somewhat along the same lines. You have the advantage of a traditional society where people know how to do consensus process, and they know how to do restorative justice to a certain degree, but it's also one which is very patriarchal and dominated by male elders. So so what you got to do is you have to create counselor institutions, women's organizations, youth organizations, and sort of to take, you know, the advantages of the traditional system and counterweight the disadvantages. That's kind of what they're doing here. Excuse me, cold. Insofar as it works with justice, they actually call the lowest level cases that deal with justice issues the peace and consensus. They have an interesting approach to decision-making process. They use majority vote for like little things that don't matter much, and they use consensus for important ones. And obviously something involving crime or, you know, people being hurt necessarily does that, but their basic involves consensus. Therefore, so they actually have to get consensus between the families of the injured party and the culprit, and through a fairly long process. And it's the idea is restorative. You know, their basic idea is like you need to completely eliminate the principle of revenge. You know, which of course is the traditional element in this. You know, that had been there, they need to get rid of in the same way that the sort of male elders were in the Zapatista council to keep the rest of the stuff. So essentially the idea is if they could actually get everybody to come to consensus about what the person could do that would maximally reverse the damage of their act, that's, you know, what they eventually settle on. The interesting thing about that is, like, they've actually been cited in human rights reports on occasion as you know, jailing people without proper trial as a result. So because, you know, it shows something about the power of international institutions. The assumptions, again, it's much like the car. You know, they assume that you have a certain level of organization, and if you don't, it's illegal. You know, it's assumed that you have a state with, and a monopoly, of course, of force, and, you know, so what human rights people do is assume a certain structure, and then they try to moderate it. But ultimately, it's this, you have rights in relation to a state, right? You don't, you know, you say my right to free speech is being suppressed, so you don't say that with like somebody cuts you off in a conversation. It has to be actually the state that does it to actually be a matter of rights. So human rights assume the very thing that they're saying they're against. If you don't have that at all, then, you know, like, then they get really upset, actually. They say anything you do is human rights abuse. So it's actually a lot of work to do that. But that's essentially the idea, is they start with the bottom level and they try to like actually work it out in a restorative justice principle. And then if that doesn't work, you go up to higher and higher levels of mediation.
Yeah, thanks for a set of really interesting and exciting talks. I just wanted to respond to Kendell. First of all, just to make a point, I think to say that you can't sell experience is untrue. I think the experience economy is a boom industry at the moment. So I just think that, you know, I think that we have to be careful around talking about that. I agree with you about the idea of the commercial gallery as a valid site for protest. I think that's it's a ripe site for protest, but I think again, it's important maybe to think about how that occurs. How can one protest that? Because, you know, I think to protest in a way which is sanctioned within the gallery might be equivalent to walking into Westfield and not seeing a die-in, but seeing a Stella McCartney jacket which has the word "Steal This Jacket" embroidered across the back in sequins, whereas storming into Matthew Barney's opening at Sadie's Coles on the night of the opening, getting on a soapbox with a megaphone and reading out that text would be a very different kind of protest. So my question really is, how can we as artists mobilise the ability to use the commercial gallery as a site of protest without being co-opted by the art market?
Quite simply put, the art market will fail, art won't. And to make a separation between what one is doing rather than how it's being instrumentalized back within the system. And I think far too many artists today are making art in order to create the Stella McCartney sequin jacket, rather than creating works of art that are resistant by themselves. I believe in the nature of art as being transformative, and I think if art, there's nothing wrong with selling works of art. The problem is selling out. And I think if one develops ways of creation that are, I would like to call it magic-based processes, and I use magic with a K, not with a C. We're not talking about we're not talking about the rabbit in the hat sort of stuff. I do believe so. In other words, if art is I conceive of what I do as being talismanic, and in that sense, the market has nothing to do with what's going on, and the talisman will function irrespective of where it is placed. And I might be very naive, but in that sense, I see it as a ritual-based production. You know, which is, I mean, perhaps I should explain that I do come from South Africa, and it is my experiences in ritual-based art production that has led me to try to use the Western system according to a completely different logic. There's nothing that stops you from walking into the art gallery with a non-Western concept of art, because the people consuming art in art galleries are not going to be paying that much attention. So I think it's very valid. Perhaps naive.
I wondered if anyone else in the audience felt the same as I did with your performance, which is I felt like I was being taught in a way that felt quite didactic and impressive. I don't know if
I did mention that in the text, that was to be expected.
Yeah, but from the very beginning, I mean.
You had a very valid experience, which is wonderful. Thank you for it.
sorry, I have a question myself. I wanted to address the subject of a bit of what was touched here as the artist as an agent for resistance. But I think this being an art school, specifically touching on how artists can resist today in the context of government funding being completely taken away from humanities and social sciences, how can the artist position himself in a role to organize protests? And I asked this particularly because I was myself involved in a demonstration this past week. It was regarding the disappeared Mexican students. And what struck me as particularly interesting, and why I wanted to go, was because it was organized, all of this was organized by an artist, a photographer. So I was wondering if you have any comments on how, besides this precarious situation that students in art are facing today, how can they come up and how can they resist in a more practical, kind of, probably a practical advice?
Well, I mean, the funny thing, I'm not an artist, right? I'm actually part of Arts Against Cuts, which is, a group which when it started had hardly any artists in it. Now it is a lot. It was the affinity group I was involved in during the, most involved in during the student protest here. But one thing I found is the remarkable overlap. I mean, I got involved in Occupy Wall Street quite early on. I was, one of the people who was sort of at the very first meeting where we sort of broke up the attempt by these Stalinists to co-opt it, but almost the entire process, when I was getting involved in it, was seemed to be mediated by women artists at one time or type or another. I mean, it was like a Greek performance artist named Georges Sagri, who anarchist, who told me about the thing to begin with. It was, Marissa Holmes was a video and had been performance artist who was the person who really took over the facilitation, and there was like 5 different artists who were actually involved at every point. So I mean, and they were all doing things which, had they been doing it in a different context, would have been called art, but they weren't. They were doing activism. So basically the same stuff gets labeled and thought of in different ways in different contexts. So I don't think there's any. It's other people who's, in larger contexts, who stamp something on it and say what it was, and this was art and that wasn't. But to a large extent, I thought that artists at every point involved in key moments in it. But also the fact that I think it's significant that just about every one of them that I was involved with early on were women who were, also more likely to eschew the sort of context where they take credit for everything that's going on, and therefore they doesn't get recognized as artists there at all. It's something to think about.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I mean, I think there are other groups, Arts Against Cuts, and there were mass protests, disrupting the awarding of the Turner Prize ceremony, in which Susan Phillips, I think, who won it that year, then dedicated the prize to the students. And there are other groups like Carrot Workers Collective, which then became Precarious Workers Brigade because they realised that there's no more carrot. This idea that somehow you do all these internships and then, you end up with something, they were like, no, there isn't anything at the end. So, and I think that that says it all, like precarious workers, it's about identifying common, huge commonalities, right, between, the types of work. Even if you're saying you're doing kind of artwork, it is in principle basically like service work in terms of the way in which your life is structured, the way in which you are paid and not paid, the amount of free work you have to do, your identity, having to kind of sell yourself, and I think it's not really surprising that when people talk about kind of emotional or affective labour, it's often the artist or the figure of the artist that becomes the paradigmatic bearer of that description of work, I suppose. So I think it's seeing those kind of commonalities, if you like, with work in general. What's the relationship between art and work, I suppose.
Yeah. And there are actions going on right now. Should we talk about this Zubrinovic thing?
You could do, yeah.
Yeah, you know, there's an action going on right now, right? A boycott. I don't know where it's up to. That's a problem. I mean, it was actually called Sophie, but I didn't get around to it yesterday. I was actually involved in this Art Angel conversation thing with Brian Eno, and a lot of my activist friends were like, "You can't do that. They get money from the Zubrinoviches. They're evil." And mentioned this to who they are. These are these people who are basically Zionist arms manufacturers and extreme right wing, but they love to patronize radical artists. And there's a huge movement to expose this and boycott them, and it's been quite successful because as you point out, it is a huge money laundering operation. You can get right at the center of where rich people are most interested in producing value. In a way, there's a reason why artistic neighborhoods seem to be so close to finance districts in so many cities. It's sort of a way that they can turn their abstraction into the ability to turn money into anything and value. It's all about value transformation. And there's a million ways you can subvert that process from right there.
Well, the art market is the world's largest unregulated market.
Unregulated.
Unregulated. There are no regulations.
More so than the drug market?
I think there's a lot of overlap.
Okay. Legal but unregulated, perhaps. Yeah.
I was interested in the conversation at the start of the questions about the protests in the shopping mall, and how what it seemed to do to the private space of shopping is to declare it as a public. By, maybe a public is a place that has a protest in it. And I wondered whether that kind of offered hope to digital spaces that have been declared private. Normally Facebook and, I don't know, I haven't heard so many discourses around Snapchat and WhatsApp, but are mentioned as organisational tools rather than sites for protest. And that is set off against the kind of discussion around whether a distributed denial of service attack is a sit-in, and I think that's ambiguous. But I wonder whether learning from protesting in a shopping centre might tell you something about protesting in Facebook.
I think it would. I mean, it was very interesting to see not only kind of shoppers joining in and occasional shop workers joining in, or at least expressing solidarity and joining in with the chants, even if they weren't allowed to leave their shop that they're working. Because somewhere like Westfield, you have all these little nodes, if you like. So all these different shops within the giant shopping mall, of course, right? So, and some of the shops closed their blinds, and others didn't. Others tried to carry on as if nothing was happening. And there was this one moment where it was hundreds of people running through the shopping mall, and there's a sort of couple eating salad, in the middle, desperately pretending this wasn't happening. And it was something really funny about that, carrying on as normal. And it reminded me of that photograph, and I should remember the name of the photographer, with the 9/11 buildings in the background, and there's people having picnics. Do you know that image? It's a very famous image. How do you carry on when there's this sort of situation of emergency or protest going on? And I think it was very successful and very interesting for all those reasons. And I mean, if you think about something like Facebook now, though, I mean, you at the moment you're getting this kind of retrenchment and re-territorialization of the proper name. So lots of people are having to change their name. If you have a fake name or a and I think this is a big issue for trans people, it's a big issue for political activists as well, who don't use their proper name on Facebook, and it's clear that Facebook are kind of stopping that from happening. You have to be your proper name, you have to be, your face, do you know what I mean? And I think that's really worrying. I mean, on the other hand, there are practical questions, if you are organising a mass protest very quickly, you're calling a protest within a day, you have to use those networks. I mean, even if you have kind of phone networks, someone will be tapped in one of those anyway, do you know what I mean? I mean, obviously, when they arrest people, they would take any mobile phones they have. I mean, it's information gathering. I think I didn't quite finish my point when I said the tactics now is less to kind of take people to court than to just keep people on bail for a very long time, and it's this idea of weaponising time, to try to make people feel isolated, individuated, psychologically very anxious. It's really, really horrible to be on bail. And, obviously what they're doing when they arrest people is taking all their stuff and going through their phones, right? So, and it's very difficult to I mean, obviously experienced people wouldn't take their phone with all their contacts and have a second phone, but you know, we're talking about a mass movement, a very fast, rapid, big movement that has a lot of very young people involved. A lot of the people who were arrested were 16 and they were on their first protest. Do you know what I mean? And I think, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, other than that's just what happens, you know what I mean? I don't know how we can avoid both using those mass networks that will reach as many people as possible and avoid them being kind of obviously looked at by the police as well. You know, I don't know how we do that.
What do you think?
Well, I think the idea of Twitter and Facebook being tools for coordination in any, like many social events, including protests, is one thing that we've seen. Like we've seen a big wave of that, and I feel like there's still a very big gap between the media that we intuitively use, let's say the kind of corporate social media, Silicon Valley social media, and the ones that are sort of gluten-free or that are like, you know, sort of and we're very interested in things like Bitcoin and dark wallet as sort of critiques, fundamental critiques of the state, because they basically are attempts to just, you know, completely subtract financial flows from the state. So I think that's a counterpart to a kind of the critique that we've heard about, you know, about systemic violence and things like that are also enacted in these systems. And then of course you get into the kind of Cody Wilson space and the defense distributed and the 3D print gun. And I was thinking of that while David spoke. What is the act of violence in the 3D printed handgun? Maybe it's the...
Depends who has it.
Well, I mean the firing of the gun itself, because if you can only fire it once, I think then you'd have to reconstruct it, or you can fire it 3 times. So the practical use of this weapon is much smaller than the act of putting it out. And actually, you talked about violence as something that has real effect, as opposed to imaginative, etc. And this putting out the drawings for this gun is something that's real. It has a real effect because power immediately reacts to it, and saying in kind of regulatory, in a kind of semi-regulatory way. But those are. It's interesting to connect those points, I think.
Oh, we've got questions. We've got a lot of questions.
I just became aware of Big Nation. Are you guys aware of this? And what you think about it?
Tell us about it.
Big Nation, I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around it, and I even pulled it out to look at it again, because it's ran by Bitcoin. So it's a new system of governance, basically. That's what they're trying to implement, like come outside of the ideal countries and establish a government that's by the people somehow via the internet. So what they say is, so Bit Nation Governance 2.0, borderless, decentralized, voluntary, purchase XB and X equity. So just having this equity, this money, I think. Bit Nation provides the same services traditional governments provide, from dispute resolution and insurance to security and much more, but in a geographically unbound, decentralized and voluntary way. It isn't working.
Yeah, it stopped working correctly as you were talking.
Does it have anything to do with the car of the police?
Yeah, I'm wondering about those guys.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm actually used to my So Bit Nation provides the same services traditional governments provide, from dispute resolution and insurance to security and much more, but in a geographically unbound, decentralized and voluntary way. Bit Nation is powered by Bitcoin 2.0 blockchain. So this is totally new for everybody here.
Okay, we'll see how that works out.
Because this is why I was asking, because like I'm very interested in social media as a means of spreading information, organization of protest. I would say more like organization would be like Facebook and perhaps WhatsApp, and Twitter being more dissemination of facts, not so much for organization, because it's so out in the open like that. No, so I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on this, because this has been going around slowly, so every now and again it resurfaces on Facebook, but okay.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit ironic. You have a Bitcoin, which is against state control, and you call it nation. So there is a continuous kind of falling back onto those kind of forms of things that make you think of sovereign power, like nation. But to really know what it is, we'd have to know how it would look, also the kind of back end of it, because it's powered by Bitcoin. It sounds
It seems
a bit strange.
It seems a bit like what David was saying, when it's such not like it's a new concept, but it's kind of like we can't wrap our head around it because of the word nation. Sometimes words can just completely slap us in the face because of the charge that they have, and just because it says nation, you attach it to a country and a locality, but perhaps what they mean is like a nation as humanity nation, and try just to get self-organized somehow using social media, like internet devices, but we can't quite understand because just like they are trying to talk about Syria, and they had to change the title 7 times because nobody understands what it actually means because it's unfathomable to a lot of people.
Yeah. It's literally unspeakable. I mean, it's a curious thing. I mean, for me, the social media stuff is fascinating that way because, on the one hand, they can't wipe out the degree to which it's utopian, but on the other hand, the infrastructure is now entirely capitalist. I mean, this shows me as an old stick-in-the-mud, old-fashioned anarchist guy now, because I remember back in 2000, 2001 when we organized a push, we used indie media, which was organized by anarchists on along anarchist principles. Now everybody's using Facebook and Twitter and capitalist corporations to organize anti-capitalist protests. I mean, how did that happen? I refuse to go on Facebook myself, but I mean, I feel like a Luddite, or I'm made to feel like that way a lot. Because, in an egalitarian environment, it's always the control of information that ultimately means power. I mean, you could say in any environment, but like if you eliminate, formal mechanisms of violence, that becomes the remaining means by which structures start to be reconstructed. So the dialectic between that sort of corporate imposition and the fact that you still have these increasingly utopian things built on top of it is intriguing to me. I think Bitcoin is using a really stupid, old-fashioned, idea of money, which is wrong. But so I think the whole project isn't going to work. But that's just me. That would take a long time to explain.
Maybe I'm an old-fashioned, not exactly, but as well, I was just thinking. Sorry, this is a sort of roundabout question. The end question is very, very simple, but the bit that leads up to it isn't. I was thinking, David, about what you were talking about, the reversal of the situation, where you go from, if I get it right, because it's a while ago now, there's so many things come in, but the group that gets together, direct democracy, creates a group, has the party, and then is settled.
Right.
Now, if we could postpone that last bit, or the protest.
Not necessarily, Kendell. It could just turn into a whole outright battle, which you then win. Sometimes that happens.
Or an outright battle that you win. But if one postponed that, or sort of stayed sort of beneath the radar for longer, so to kind of postpone that confrontation, what other, are there possibly other ways of getting your way, whatever that way is, than actual outright confrontation? And one of the things I was just thinking about is, I don't know about anybody else, but the looming election next year makes me very, very depressed and makes me miserable and feel like I'm on bail. Or, there's this sense that, there's no choice, and we've got a situation where we are going to then be run by another lot that are going to do the same thing again. However, there are actually ways of doing things. We can vote. We can. And
I can.
Well, you can. I'm in a lucky position. I can vote in the States and here, and little that lot of good it's done. But anyway, but I'm just sort of thinking, what is anybody's attitude here towards elections? Towards we've talked a lot about different kinds of means towards different kinds of ends, like protest, art, bitcoins. We haven't talked about elections.
And the ends of, of the protests they lie or die in, there is a hope that we might get justice or change the law or show up state violence, which then might, if you get everybody to see the state violence, perhaps we then change things, or revolution as these different kinds of ends. And I'm just sort of thinking about and wondering what you think about those, how to connect those means with some ends that we want. And do elections feature in there at all or not? Sorry for the very roundabout question.
I guess I was confused, I guess. I mean, I myself don't really do it that way. I don't tell other people that they shouldn't, but I mean, all the people tell me all the time that I should. My general feeling is, I should clarify something. When we were talking about the flashes of conflict, I mean, that's no longer the be-all and end-all of it. I mean, those moments of direct action, even when you do win, don't actually lead to that, like, general transformation. So in a way, they stand as these kind of advertisements to the existence of a movement that's got people sufficiently upset that they attack it, So the whole function of that thing has that moment of confrontation has shifted anyway. It's a momentary stage along a much broader process of transformation that is happening on a deeper level. I mean, there's the logic of creating spaces outside the system ultimately leads to a dual power sort of situation. That's the sort of, and the reason, what you see around the world, and I think 2011 will be seen historically as marking a real break this way, is that, you get stuff in Bosnia, you get stuff in Brazil, Turkey, things start flashing up all over the world. It always takes the same Hong Kong, the same form of these people who are not actually directly trying to take over the levers of power in a conventional sense as a revolution. If you're a democratic movement, basically you're no longer trying to operate through state institutions by taking over either electorally or through violence, because what you've got is a global bureaucratic system now, which is answerable basically to capitalism. And that's what the global justice movement around, in Seattle and so forth, for Genoa, was trying to point out. The existence of these mechanisms whereby, there's this kind of network of trade institutions like the IMF, World Bank, NAFTA, EU, whatever they are, the banking system, the NGOs, the transnational corporations, are all these different public-private makes no difference, they all fuse together. And you created the world's first global bureaucratic administration, which has much more power than any government. They could, you could elect whoever you want, and they just say, yeah, it doesn't matter, you're the policies. And social welfare policies are written by some NGO in Chicago, the economic policies are written by the IMF. With all these global bureaucrats who are doing this. And, so the only way that you can really have any effect is creating an outside. Now, often an outside doesn't even exist, and that's what people, or either you pressure from the outside, or if it doesn't exist, you create an outside, is what I meant to say. That's why you have the other square occupations and the mall occupations or whatever it might be. But the thing is that actually can have a lot more effect on changing the behavior of those who are in power than trying to enter into the game which they've already rigged. I mean, I always take the example of Argentina. I mean, most people don't know what happened to the third world debt crisis. Most people think it's still going on. For the most part, it's not. The global justice movement actually won. In the sense the IMF, our arch enemy, was kicked out of was kicked out of East Asia, was kicked out of Latin America. The debt crisis largely ended, it lingered in some parts of Africa. But it happened because the key moment was Argentina defaulted on their debt and got away with it. They defaulted on their debt because they had, after there was a crash, austerity, this usual formula, there was this nonviolent uprising of people. Their slogan was "Que se vayan todos," they can all go to hell. We don't, all political parties, all politicians are assholes. We don't want to deal with any of them. We're just going to organize ourselves. They created neighborhood assemblies, occupied factories. So they created their own alternative economic system. Basically they told the politicians as a class, prove to us you are in any way relevant to our lives, or we're just going to carry on without you. And it got to the point where, and this I think is the key point when social transformation occurs in the circumstance, it got to the point where politicians could no longer go to restaurants without wearing false mustaches and things, because people would just point them out and laugh at them, throw food at them. And at that point they had to do something, so they defaulted on the debt, and they got away with it because there really wasn't much more the IMF could do to punish them. And that sent off a ricochet, which had basically ended the debt crisis. So you can do more, not, if they tried to form a new political party and contest elections on the platform of let's abrogate, it never would have worked. But they got this very mild social democratic government, which would never have done something radical under any other circumstances, into a position where they said, oh my God, the entire political class has been discredited, we have to do something to make ourselves prove we're relevant to people's lives.
I think we can go for one last question with Sophie, as we seem to be running out over time.
I don't normally do this. Okay, so I was just going to ask something about hopelessness and art students specifically, and becoming an artist. And there are a lot of conversations I've had over the past few years about paying enormous fees to go to art school, and a friend of mine went to Goldsmiths. She was doing part-time and working full-time. She gave up after about 2 years or something, and there were various instances where there were people demonstrating outside Goldsmiths on days where she had to go and get equipment out. So she was having this kind of dilemma where she literally couldn't afford to pay for this education, which she couldn't even resist because she had no time or money to resist it. So maybe my question is about being able to afford resistance and the power play of students' money, artists' money, and how you motivate people towards resistance who are reluctant, because a lot of the conversations I have revolve around people saying they're here for 2 years, there isn't enough time, the results of their actions might not even affect the people afterwards. So there's a sense of hopelessness, and it's just a static, nothing changes. So I just wondered if anybody had anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, just on the point about students and being workers, I mean, yeah, I think, this image we might still nostalgically have of students just get to dedicate themselves to their studies, is certainly not true. I mean, everyone I teach is a worker. And I think that coming out of the California occupations a few years ago, they had this slogan, we work in order to study in order to work. And I think there's this kind of, despite certain sort of right-wing narratives that still want to paint students as somehow privileged, it's clearly not. I mean, they're clearly, hugely indebted working subjects, with lots of responsibility and often family and caring issues and so on, so there isn't, I think it might be thinking about not what it means to be a separate class or what it means to have this privilege, but actually what you have in common with everyone else who's, working and struggling, if you see what I mean. And I think, when you get those moments of sort of solidarity between staff and students, let's say, or between admin staff and teaching staff and students, where there's a sort of common interest being recognised, despite the university's best attempts to individuate and create consumers, and there's this very, very uneasy situation at the moment where, students formerly subjects supposed to be judged are also, clients who are never supposed to be wrong, right? Because they're buying a product and, are they the product of the university? Are you buying it's a very, very, very uneasy and unpleasant situation to be in. The moment you privatise education, you create these tensions. There are obviously very different models. I mean, Germany just abolished all their tuition fees, right? So, I mean, these are clear kind of obviously economic decisions. We saw what happened in 2010. There was mass resistance to that fee, that, the single largest fee raised in the history of the world. The tripling of tuition fees from £3,000 to £9,000. We saw, I mean, people fought to stop that happening. And I know what you're saying about this depression and hopelessness and lack of time and lack of being able to be involved, but I think it's because there have been these defeats partly that's feeding into that, you see what I mean? And I think sometimes you have to take a medium and longer term position vis-a-vis your own despair and hopelessness, if you see what I mean.
No, I'm totally on it, but I'm just saying I'm having a lot of conversations with other people where I mean, it's difficult to kind of...
I agree. I mean, it's understanding why people feel like that in the first place, for very good material reasons. But then thinking about how everyone, in a sense, is feeling something similar because of the sort of precariousness and economic demands.
Yeah, and I would add one thing, which actually the story I started with about the 2,000 anarchists feeling depressed and going home and not realizing the entire world apparatus of power was, moving heaven and earth to make them feel depressed. And when you realize that, you realize, wow, they're really scared of us. Maybe they know something we don't know. I mean, clearly it's possible they're just completely deluded about our potential power, but maybe they're right. If they feel threatened, I mean, if they are like rearranging the entire system to make us feel we don't have time to think or create or oppose them, it's probably because they think that if we did do that, it would be really dangerous to them, or they wouldn't bother. So the very fact that they're mobilizing in this way against us implies that they think that we have enormous amounts of power that we don't often imagine that we do.
Yeah.
Just very specifically on the question of art, I have my doubts whether art can actually be taught. And the over-professionalization of the art system led to this mythology that all you need to have for a career is study at Goldsmiths and you'll just be the next generation. Well, it doesn't work like that. I mean, thousands of people from around the world are trying to get into these English academies, these British academies, in order to get their careers. It doesn't work like that. Being an artist is a state of mind that nobody can teach you.
I totally agree with that. I think first of all, art used to be a very unpopular study, something that your parents would beg you not to go study, and now it is something in which like massive amounts of people are sort of influencing into the system, right? At the same time, the things that you study are changing as well. So the economic, aesthetic, visual, political, social role of artists, designers is changing at the same time. So like if you're going, I'm a graphic designer, if you go and study graphic design, it's absolutely no longer what your teachers think it is out there. So it is also inherently wrong to have it being taught by really old people who have a very sort of outmoded idea of what is the realities you're going to enter. Am I right?
No, I'm talking about old people as if they were...
No, I'm not. Sorry. I mean, you're obviously, I've been silent for the most of the time, and that's also an act of protest. So, like, I'm saying that someone, it's not about age, but it's about knowing what's around. And I think that in part, it comes in deep down, as you're saying, to see your solidarity with other people who are basically working in the same conditions and have to face the same problems, the same injustice. But on the other hand, also use the way that you work as an artist, and then we get to you, the part that can't be taught, in a way that is ungraspable by any, that is in a way in itself an autonomous act of protest or resistance or whatever. So you also have the work that you make that can participate in this, not just the politicization of your labor or your social role in a school.
I would also think that maybe all the structures in which we make art, or where art is displayed, which is art schools or museums or art galleries, they're also there also to contain something, because you can only make it as long as it's in there. Because if you do it outside, maybe some potential power that you didn't know that art had could explode from outside of its limits. And I think that's always what we like to do, is like contain something that could be dangerous into something that's safe and that's controllable, and then that can have that can be economically valuable as well.
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to stop there for tonight. Thank you all for coming along, and thank you to Kendell, Daniel, Nina, and David. We hope you enjoyed this, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
is certainly not true. I mean, like everyone I teach is a worker, and I think that coming out of the California occupations a few years ago, you know, they had the slogan, "We work in order to study, in order to work." You know, and I think there's this kind of, you know, despite certain sorts of like right-wing narratives that still want to paint students as like somehow privileged, you know, it's clearly not. I mean, they're clearly, you know, hugely indebted working subjects, you know, with lots of responsibility and often family and caring issues and so on, you know, so there isn't, I think it might be thinking about not what it means to be a separate class or what it means to have this privilege, but actually what you have in common with everyone else who's, you know, working and struggling, if you see what I mean. And I think, you know, when you get those moments of sort of solidarity between staff and students, let's say, or between admin staff and you know, teaching staff and students, where there's a sort of common interest being recognised, despite the university's best attempts to individuate and create consumers, you know, and there's this very, very uneasy situation at the moment where, you know, students formerly subjects supposed to be judged are also, you know, clients who are never supposed to be wrong, right? Because they're buying a product, and you know, are they the product of the university? Are you buying? You know, it's a very, very, very uneasy and unpleasant situation to be in. The moment you privatise education, you create these tensions. You know, there are obviously very different models. I mean, Germany just abolished all their tuition fees, right? So, you know, I mean, these are clear kind of obviously economic decisions. You know, we saw what happened in 2010. You know, there was mass resistance to that fee, that, you know, the single largest fee raise in the history of the world. You know, the tripling of tuition fees from £3,000 to £9,000. You know, we saw, I mean, people fought to stop that happening. You know, and I know what you're saying about this depression and hopelessness and like lack of time and lack of being able to be involved, but, you know, I think it's because there have been these defeats partly that's feeding into that, if you see what I mean. And I think sometimes you have to sort of take a medium and longer term position vis-a-vis your own despair and hopelessness, if you see what I mean. Otherwise,
I'm totally on it, but I'm just saying I'm having a lot of conversations with others.
No, yeah, sure. I mean,
it's difficult to kind of.
I agree. I mean, it's understanding why people feel like that in the first place. You know, for very good material reasons. You know, but then thinking about how everyone, in a sense, is feeling something similar because of the sort of precariousness and economic demands.
Yeah, and I would add one thing, which actually the story I started with about the 2,000 anarchists feeling depressed and going home and not realizing the entire world apparatus of power was, you know, moving heaven and earth to make them feel depressed. You know, and when you realize that, you realize, wow, they're really scared of us. Maybe they know something we don't know. You know, I mean, clearly it's possible they're just completely deluded about our potential power, but you know, maybe they're right. If they feel threatened, I mean, if they are like rearranging the entire system to make us feel we don't have time to, you know, think or create or oppose them, it's probably because they think that if we did do that, it would be really dangerous for them, or they wouldn't bother. So the very fact that they're mobilizing in this way against us implies that they think that we have enormous amounts of power that we don't often imagine that we do.
Yeah.
Just very specifically on the question of art, I have my doubts whether art can actually be taught. And the over-professionalization of the art system led to this mythology that all you need to have for a career is study at Goldsmiths and you'll just be the next generation. Well, it doesn't work like that. I mean, thousands of people from around the world are trying to get into these English academies, these British academies, in order to get their careers. It doesn't work like that. You know, being an artist is a state of mind that nobody can teach you.
I totally agree with that. I think first of all, art used to be a very unpopular study, something that your parents would beg you not to go study, and now it is something in which like massive amounts of people are sort of influencing into the system, right? At the same time, the things that you study are changing as well. So the economic, aesthetic, visual, political, social role of artists, designers is changing at the same time. So like if you're going, I'm a graphic designer, if you go and study graphic design, it's absolutely no longer what your teachers think it is out there. So it is also inherently wrong to have it being taught by really old people who have a very, very sort of outmoded idea of what the reality is you're going to enter. Am I right?
No, I was just, when you were talking about old people, as if they were
No, I'm not sorry. I mean, you're obviously, you know, I've been silent for most of the time, and that's also an act of protest. So, like, I'm saying that someone, it's not about age, but it's about knowing what's around. And I think that in part it comes indeed down, as you're saying, to seeing your solidarity with other people who are basically working in the same conditions and have to face the same problems, the same injustice. But on the other hand, also use the way that you work as an artist, and then we get to you, the part that can't be taught, in a way that is ungraspable by any, that is in a way in itself an autonomous act of protest or resistance or whatever. So you also have the work that you make that can participate in this, not just the politicization of your labor or your social role in a school.
I would also think that maybe all the structures in which we make art or where art is displayed, which is art schools or museums or art galleries, they're also there also to contain something, because it's only, you can only make it as long as it's in there, because if you do it outside, it may be some potential power that you didn't know that art had could explode from outside of its limits. And I think that's always what we like to do, is like contain something that could be dangerous into something that's safe and that's controllable, and then that can have that can be economically valuable as well.
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to stop there for tonight. Thank you all for coming along, and thank you to Kendell, Daniel, Nina, and David. We hope you enjoyed this, and have a nice evening. Thank you.